My life's dream is to win the lost, grow the saved, and send the committed. Children, I guess you can head on out to Children's Church. John's waiting for whoever's supposed to be going with him. John, you're so patient. Yeah, just doing such a good job there. Win the lost, grow the saved, send the committed. I spent my life preparing to follow that dream, and I've spent my life pushing toward that dream. As a pastor, that dream drives me, it haunts me, and I'll be honest with you, at times it really frustrates me as I look throughout southeastern Nashville and see all the churches virtually empty while surrounded by tens of thousands of people who need Jesus, who need the church to introduce them to Jesus, who can then give them the lives they really want, the lives they really need. Last March, I took our National Baptist Association church planting coordinator out to lunch. Ben Atkinson, great guy, interesting guy, great guy. And I figured, church planters have the same challenge we do. They're trying to get the church into the community and the community into the church. But to make their job even more difficult, supposedly, they usually have much fewer people than an established church does. And they don't have a building to invite people to. So I thought, I'll take Ben out to lunch and I can find out what's working among church planters throughout Nashville, and maybe I can get some ideas that will work here. Well, we had a great lunch and good fellowship, but I must confess that when I left that meeting, I was somewhat disappointed. You see, in addition to helping church planters plant churches, Ben's job also entails meeting with pastors to help them find ways in established churches to reach new people for Jesus. At the end of our meeting, Ben said, "Brother Ray, when I meet with pastors, there are 4 things I always suggest that they try to reach people for Jesus. You're already doing all 4 of them." But then he said something very profound in your notes. He said the key to both planting churches and reaching people, what he meant was in established churches, is to help members see themselves as missionaries. Missionaries. What is a missionary? Well, very simply put, a missionary is someone with a mission. Folks, we all have a mission. We find it in Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Jesus said, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you." Jesus said we are to go out, and if we're going to reach the nations, we go out into the world. And we go out into the world to reach these nations. But we don't have to go to South Korea and to the Olympics. We don't have to go to South Africa. We don't have to... My goodness, the world is right out the door, down the street, and around the corner. The world is in the boardroom. The world is in the lunchroom. Our mission is to reach the world. And that mission was so important, so critical to what it means to be a Christ follower, that it's found not once, but 5 times in the historical records of the life of Jesus and the life of the early church. We are called to be missionaries. So the question then becomes, how can we be missionaries like Jesus? I want to spend today and the next 3 Sundays talking about how we can be missionaries. Where we live, where we work, where we socialize. How can we be missionaries? With that in mind, open your cell phones, your pads, nobody's got a laptop, or if all else fails, your Bible, to Matthew chapter 9, first book in the New Testament, 9th chapter. While you're turning, as I've thought about it, and I've thought about this a lot, this commission, this command to reach the world is so important. It's found 5 times in the first 5 books of our New Testament. That being the case, why do we need to spend time helping believers, Christ followers, see themselves as missionaries? Why is that even a thing? Heard about an English teacher who embarked on a vocabulary unit in her 9th grade English class. She wanted to develop the students' vocabulary, teach them new words. Kind of a fun thing. Well, she had a little boy named Jimmy in the class who absolutely hated English, and I can kind of understand his rationale. I mean, his thinking kind of went like this: I already know English, why do I have to learn it? I already speak English, why do I have to learn it? Well, one day, the teacher said, Jimmy, do you know the difference between ignorance and apathy? Not even looking up from the piece of paper on which he was doodling, he mumbled, I don't know, and I don't care. And I'm so sleepy, it took me a second to get that joke. I love it. Some Sundays, the laughter just rolls right off. Other Sundays, it kind of creeps across the room. For many Christ followers, that's the story of the mission. Ignorance and or apathy. I don't know. Or I don't care. But you know, as I've walked down this road a while, I'm convinced that maybe even the majority of folks who are in church Sunday, faithfully, who are seriously committed Christians, I think they know what their mission is, and I think they care about their mission. And I think further, they are frustrated because they cannot seem to accomplish their mission. Why is that? Why is it that committed Christians, people who have walked with Jesus for many, 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 many years, who understand the issues of life and death, and you know, we look at things like that horrendous shooting down in Broward County, and we know how badly the world needs Jesus. So why is it we can't seem to accomplish our mission? Well, I think there are probably several answers to that question. But one of the biggest answers, one of the biggest obstacles I've seen throughout my life as a Christ follower, believers avoid the world. So many believers avoid the world. Committed Christians who are serious about their faith, their best friends, their social interactions, focus on the church, Sunday school, worship. Everybody they know is a believer. And I've observed over the years that many believers who know their Bibles and who are serious about their walk of faith, they won't go to company parties, they won't go to cast parties, they won't go to Christmas parties, they won't go to Super Bowl parties, they won't go to any kind of party because there might be unbelievers there, and they might be drinking. And they might actually do some things of which we don't approve. And so they won't go to parties. They won't get involved in civic organizations. They won't get involved in this or that. They avoid the world. But now, preacher, the Bible says in 2 Corinthians 6 and Ephesians 5 that we are to avoid the world. Now, it may surprise you to hear this, but in my years as a pastor, I've known believers who know their Bible, and they have come to me with that very statement. The Bible says we're supposed to avoid the world. None other than Chuck Swindoll used that wonderful illustration. You know, we believers, you know, we think we're going to rub off on the world. Well, if you're a glove working out in the mud, I've seen muddy gloves, but I've never seen glovey mud. So you should avoid the world. Actually, Chuck Swindoll doesn't believe you should avoid the world, but people have used that illustration. And they'll point to 2 Corinthians 6 and Ephesians 5 to justify their holding the world at arm's length. Now, if by chance that's your reason for avoiding the world, let me kindly say, think again. Think again. I'm not going to take time to read these passages, but if I've just tapped you on the shoulder quite by accident, go read these verses this week. Take these notes with you. See if what I'm about to tell you isn't so. In 2 Corinthians 6:14 and following, Paul's point is that our most intimate relationships are to be with believers so that we will not be like the world. His point is not that we should avoid the world. His point is that the people we date, the people with whom we are best friends, the people we marry, the people with whom we go into business ought to be believers who live like believers so that we will not be like the world. That's his point. And in Ephesians 5:7-15, Paul's point, and this is going to surprise you, Paul's point is that we are to avoid believers who act like the world. Check the context. He's talking about the behavior of believers. And he says that we are not to be confused by empty words, for it's on account of these things that he's listed that believers are tempted to do, that the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience, which is his word for the folks out there, the world. His point there is not that we are to avoid the world. His point is that we are to avoid believers who behave like the world. In fact, Paul said, rather surprisingly and rather firmly, in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, starting in verse 9, I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with immoral people. I did not at all mean with the immoral people of this world, or with the covetous and swindlers, or with idolaters, for then you would have to go out of the world. But actually, I wrote to you not to associate with any so-called brother if he is an immoral person, or covetous, or an idolater, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or a swindler, not even to eat with such as one of these. Paul did not teach us to avoid the world. And I don't know about you, but to me, that's kind of a relief, for Jesus embraced the world. Wait, say what? Oh, yes. Jesus embraced the world. Go read the histories of the life of Jesus. Look at him in action. Usually when you find him surrounded by or eating with the world. Now, over the years, and I've been in these shoes, okay? All right. When I first got started, you know, our slogan was, I want to be like Jesus, so I'm going to avoid the world. I want to be like Jesus, so I'm going to stay away from the world and the things of the world. Who were Jesus' biggest opponents? Somebody tell me, who were Jesus' biggest opponents? The Pharisees. The Pharisees. Believers who avoid the world are like Pharisees. They're like the Pharisees. The word Pharisees means separated ones. The Pharisees decided to stay away from anybody that did not keep the Jewish law. The Pharisees decided to stay away from anybody that did not measure up, that did not qualify up to their level of righteousness. They thought that's what godly people did. And then they see this rabbi hanging out with the riffraff, and it totally blew their minds. Because Jesus didn't avoid the world, Jesus embraced the world. Chapter 9. Verse 10, with those thoughts just kind of boiling on the back burner there. Then it happened that as Jesus was reclining at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were dining with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why is your teacher eating with the tax collectors and sinners? But when Jesus heard this, he said, It is not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick. But go and learn what this means. He's quoting from the Old Testament. I desire compassion and not sacrifice. For I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Now, with that simmering in the pot, let me season the stew just a bit with Luke 15, verses 1 and 2. Now all the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near to Jesus to listen to him. Both the Pharisees and the scribes began to grumble, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." Now, here is the sinless Son of God hanging out with tax collectors and sinners. Now, sinners, irreligious Jews, or immoral Jews. They were people who did not keep the Jewish law. They were people who were just kind of, stumbling along. They never went to the synagogue. There are several instances where women of somewhat ill repute were welcomed into Jesus' presence. There was this woman at a well. Another woman whose sins had been forgiven by Jesus, who bathed his feet with her tears, dried them with her hair. And the Pharisees were agog and aghast. Oh, and tax collectors. Tax collectors were interesting people. They actually colluded with the Russians. They colluded with the Romans to collect taxes from their own people, and in the process they were allowed to squeeze whatever else they could get out of their own people to enrich their own bank accounts. It was literally legalized extortion. Jesus welcomed these people. When you ate with somebody in those days, when you sat down to break bread with someone, that meant you welcomed them. You accepted them. And unlike many believers today who are so worried about their reputations, Jesus wasn't worried at all that he might get a bad reputation for hanging out with the world. In fact, he kind of scoffed at the Pharisees in Luke chapter 7, verse 34, when he said, he's contrasting himself with John the Baptist, who was an ascetic. I mean, John didn't do anything, go anywhere. I mean, he ate locusts and wild honey and wore animal skins. And then Jesus said, "Son of Man has come eating and drinking," and you say, "Behold, a gluttonous man and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." We could paraphrase that. A party animal. Hanging out with the riffraff. Jesus didn't care the reputation he got. Jesus cared more about the eternal destinies of the riffraff than he cared about his own reputation. Now, I got to tell you, over the years, I've been amazed at how much Christians care about their reputation and use it as a justification to avoid the world. How can we be missionaries like Jesus? Well, every believer needs two conversions. One out of the world and another back into the world. Every believer needs two conversions. We do need to be converted out of the world. Now, we all know that when you come to Jesus Christ, you put your faith and trust in Him, some amazing things happen. Bottom line, we are transformed. There are many metaphors to describe this miracle that we call conversion. But one of my favorites is we are transformed from darkness into light. Now, in that troublesome passage in Ephesians 5, Paul actually wrote, "For you formerly were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of the light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness and righteousness and truth, trying to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. Therefore, do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead, even expose them." As believers, we are called out of the darkness to become light. We become light. Then Paul says we go back into the darkness to shine our light. But now, let me just point out, using Paul's metaphor, the light does not stand into the darkness and point and say, "You're darkness, shame on you." The light does not look down its nose at the darkness and treat it with disdain or hold it at arm's length. The light just shines. The light just shines. Now, some people will be drawn to the light, and some people will run from the light, and some people may even try to extinguish the light. But the light just shines. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, "Let your light so shine in such a..." I've learned. Why did the New American Standard have to change? I memorized this text 20, 30 years ago, and they changed it. I'm trying to rememorize it in the new version. It's driving me nuts. "Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your condemnation and glorify your Father who is in heaven." Let your light shine in such a way that they may see you look down your nose at them and glorify your Father who is in heaven. That's what it says. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Missionaries like Jesus, they come out of the world to become different. They go back into the world to make a difference. Now, I dare say the problem with many Christians today, the problem with many churches today, we've come out of the world and become different. But man, don't ask me to go back into the world. And I was that way. Working in a lumber mill, I went off by myself and read my Bible and ate my lunch. Working at McDonald's, I'd run down to the break room by myself and read my lunch. Eat my Bible, eat my lunch. I remember a seminary professor who was notorious for not, she worked at a bank, notorious for not going to Christmas parties or Super Bowl parties because they might serve alcohol. Oh, we come out of the world and become different. We won't go back into the world. In the excellent book, Rumors of God, a Jesus follower by the name of Catherine walked with the Lord for about 20 years, loved Jesus. As a teenager, she'd been a Christian for a while. She worked with the children's department in her church, and then in college she hung out with the church's collegiate ministry. She had come out of the world. But in her early 20s, she graduated from college, and she began to discover that she was becoming disillusioned with her faith. Quite honestly, I don't know that she would have admitted this to anyone. She was kind of bored with her faith. Kind of bored with her faith. Is this all there is, really? Now, her professional life was taking off. Trained as a professional makeup artist, I mean, she had tons of clientele. She did makeup for stars, for celebrities, for politicians, for supermodels. I mean, her professional life was hip, exciting, fascinating, which only further served to demonstrate that there was something missing from her spiritual life. Now, I don't know if she would have put it this way. In fact, in the book, they didn't put it this way. But she realized she needed a conversion back into the Word. After a lot of prayer and research, she found a very radical, dramatic way to get back into the world. A professional makeup artist, she began to volunteer backstage at a local strip club, applying makeup to the strippers before they went out on stage to perform. Over the months, she built relationships with these girls, loved them, learned their names. One night she thought, you know what? I'm going to bring some sermon CDs. My pastor's sermons are so good. I'm going to bring some CDs and just have them available. No pressure. They were just there. If one of the ladies wanted one, she could take it as long as she brought it back. After a couple of months, a stripper by the name of Rebecca asked if she could take a sermon CD, and she did. Next night she brought it back, exchanged it for another one. Next night she brought it back. Friday night before the weekend, she asked if she could take the whole box. When she brought the box back Monday night, Catherine asked Rebecca if she'd like to go to church with her. And Rebecca said, "Would I be welcome there?" "Of course you would," Catherine said. "We would love to have you." So Rebecca went with Catherine to church that Sunday. And she met the pastor out and they're one of these churches where they have, this meeting area and they serve coffee and donuts and stuff. And she sat down, talked with the pastor, told the pastor what she did, and he didn't blink, he didn't bat an eye. He said, "We're just so glad you're here." They talked a little bit about faith. At the end of the worship service, Rebecca asked Jesus into her heart. 2 weeks later, when she was baptized, 2 front rows of the church were packed with strippers and other workers from the club who came to support Rebecca on her big day. Rebecca stopped stripping, learned to be a makeup artist herself, and continued to go with Catherine to the strip club to apply makeup to and share the love of Jesus with the other strippers at the club. The Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 9:19 and following, "For though I am free from all men," we talked about that in Sunday school this morning, "though I am free from all men, I made myself a slave to all, so that I may win more. To the Jews I became as a Jew, so that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, though not being myself under the law, the Torah, so that I might win those who are under the law." I don't live like a Jew anymore, but I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those who are without the law, the Gentiles, the world, as without law, though not being without the law of God, but under the law of Christ, so that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I've become all things to all men and women, so that I may by all means save some. I do all things for the sake of the gospel, so that I may become a fellow partaker of it. Missionaries like Jesus welcome the world while different from the world, so that they might win them. Let's pray. Father,